side I can hear I can hear an echo, but I don't know whether this echo is affecting everybody. But it's now gone. But I think without much further ado, I'd like to call upon Harold Hester to give us his monthly talk on the night skies of Botswana. Yeah, I suppose he really doesn't need any introduction, but he is our local expert on the night sky. Harold, please take the floor.
Thank you very much, Prof. I don't know so much about the local expert. I'll just try and do my best. In the land of the blind, one eye is king. So this month, coming up month, we don't have any eclipses or anything really exciting happening in the heavens. So we'll just point out what's coming up. I wonder whether any of you saw the occultation of Venus by the moon on the morning of the 24th of March, which I asked you to look out for this time last month. Did any of you see that eclipse? I was reminded of the similarity between astronomy and cricket. In cricket, you have 11 fielders, 2 batsmen, 2 umpires, and they're all on this beautiful green field. The umpire tosses the red ball to the bowler, and he says, "Let the play begin, play." And then down comes the rain. Similarly with astronomy, if you want to see this occultation, you must know that that day there will be heavy overcast. So we couldn't see the occultation in Gabs, similar to, as I said, to cricket. So unfortunately, that's a pity. Now, in April, the Milky Way stretches across from the southeast to northwest. I wonder whether any of you recognize that rock formation. It was called the Mukurub. I think that is the Mukurub in Namibia, pre-1988, when it collapsed. I'm talking about non-astronomical things, but it was quite interesting. It collapsed due to some rain. So, prominent features in April looking south. That's the map in my star guide. And let's just take a closer look at what there is that we can see. So we need to get our orientation. First of all, we look for crux and the 2 pointers. That's the top arrow. That's there. Then over this side is Canis Major, and behind here is Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky. I can't remember what's here. And then this is Canopus. Oh, pointing here is Orion, which is disappearing over the western horizon. And in the east, we've got Scorpius coming up. Now, this picture represents a little bit, it's probably about 10 o'clock at night. So you're not going to see this as soon as the sun sets. The Scorpius, you have to wait a while for Scorpius to come up, and then, but Orion will disappear. So these are, you've got the, if you look up, you'll see the Milky Way. And then, as I've said, Crux, Orion disappearing, Sirius up here, Canopus, which is part of Carina, and then Scorpius here. So let's take a closer look at what we can see. I'd like to talk about the nebulae. As you know, I think most of you know that a vast cloud of gas and dust in space, often glowing with dazzling colors and shapes. And it's the nebula are either remnants of exploded stars, called supernova, that scatter their material across the galaxy, or they're cradles of star formation, where gravity pulls together the gas and dust until nuclear fusion ignites and a new star is born, with tremendous energy and a planetary system around it. They come in different types and sizes, depending on their composition, location, and origin. Some of the most famous nebula are Orion Nebula, Crab Nebula, and Horsehead Nebula. Sadly, we won't see any of those three this month because, as I said, Orion Nebula is disappearing over the western horizon. Horsehead Nebula is in Orion, and Crab Nebula is in Taurus, which is not visible at the moment. However, not to disappoint you, we do have other nebula which are easily visible, especially on a dark night, clear sky, and the binoculars or a scope. The four major nebula which we can see at the moment from Gaborone and Botswana, the most, probably the most prominent one is Eta Carina Nebula, Theta Carinae. That is the one corner of the Diamond Cross, and that's the top one here, Eta Carina Nebula. Down here is Tarantula Nebula. That's very close to the Large Magellanic Cloud. That's the cloud there, and there's the Tarantula Nebula. And then over on the left, coming up from the eastern horizon, we have two very close together, Trifid Nebula and Lagoon Nebula. So I urge you to go out on a dark night and try and look for these nebula. They will be blurs, little blurs, not sparkling like the, not shining like the normal stars, but blurs. And that's where stars are, mainly where stars are forming. Now, we can only see the blurs. However, Hubble brought so much in outer space closer to us, and that's what the nebula look like from close up. Top left is Eta Carina, Tarantula Nebula up top right. That's the one near the Large Magellanic Cloud. Trifid Nebula and Lagoon Nebula are very close to one another, as I mentioned. But they are magnificent spectacles. I'm always impressed with these nebula as they look in real life through the eyes of Hubble. So just going back, just to remind you where they are, Carina Nebula in the middle of our picture, Tarantula Nebula next to the Large Magellanic Cloud, and lastly, the two Lagoon and Trifid just southeast of Scorpio. There's Scorpio, and those are two there. So the three of them are pretty easy to find. Look for Scorpio, and you'll see those two. Look for Crux and the two pointers, and you'll see Eta Carina Nebula. And down below, look for the Large Magellanic Cloud, and you'll see Tarantula Nebula. At the small Magellanic Cloud, which you can't mistake, there's 47 Tucanae, but we'll talk about that next month, because that's not a nebula, that's a cluster. So, moving on, I'd just like to, all of the fun and excitement is in the south, and we've got to make the people in the north happy. So we have to look north, and we see the Coma star cluster, also known as Malot. It's small, but it's a very important cluster. It's an open cluster located in constellation Coma Berenice. If you look at the picture I've shown here, it says there that the cluster makes out a distinctive V shape. Well, I actually couldn't really see the distinctive V shape, but I suppose if one uses one's imagination, one can see it. And it used to represent the tail of Leo, but in 240 BC, Ptolemy III renamed it after his Egyptian queen Berenice, whose hair she had cut off her own hair because she was so happy that he'd returned from battle alive. She thought that he would be overcome, I think it was by the Trojans. So she made an arrangement with the goddess of war, Diana, that she would cut off her hair if he came back alive. He did come back. She cut off her hair. He was, desperate when she cut off her hair because she was so beautiful. Her hair hung down to her waist. So he put it on an altar. And the next morning when he went to admire this hair, it had gone. he wanted to kill everybody in the court, but the leader of the court said, no, don't worry. That hair has been, he had to think very quickly, very, very quickly. And he said, that hair has been thrown into the sky. And he pointed out this constellation, Melot 111, Berenice's legendary hair. So let's just show you where that is. There we are. There's Coma Berenice. Coma Berenice's here, and it's down there. That's Melot 111, and that's what the formation looks like above there, as we showed here. So I always just love that story. It's such a nice one, and it's also fairly easy to see. You can see the ecliptic. You can see Leo over here, Leo with Regulus, which, oh gosh, what's happened here? I'm going to go back. Regulus over there. Oh, where is there? There's Regulus, and Arcturus is over there. So Melot 111 is between Arcturus and Regulus, which are two of the brightest stars in the northern hemisphere, just below the ecliptic. Coma Berenice. Okay. So, homework for next month. Please look up and find the largest globular cluster in the night sky. The bright ones amongst you can look up the second largest globular cluster. So I'm setting you that task. You need to find the largest and the second largest globular cluster, which is different to a nebula, in the night sky. And you'll all be tested on it next month. So please get out and do some homework. And I end my story.
Thank you very much, Harold. I wonder whether there are some questions or comments.
Can I ask Harold?
Yeah, David.
Just about, because there were that lineup of the 5 planets in the evening sky. I never managed to see it.
No, I didn't either. That was also towards the end of the month, wasn't it? Or was the beginning of last month?
I think it's now.
Now, I didn't know that. But the moon's not too bright at the moment. But our skies aren't so clear at the moment, David. They're not clear with all the cloud. We've had quite a lot of rain. That would be my excuse.
Okay. No, thank you very much. I don't know who else has a comment, but yeah, we'll try and do that homework. I think now it's time to yeah, my phone is ringing here. It's time to now prepare for the talk by Mike. So thank you very much, Harold. I think Mike is ready. He needs no introduction. Mike is Professor Emeritus at Liverpool John Moores University and a visiting professor of astronomy at BUST. And he is the founding chair of this organization, the Astronomical Society of Botswana. And I think with that, I'm delighted to welcome you all, especially welcome Mike to give us this talk, which holds a lot of mysteries. So Mike, take the floor and give us your talk.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that nice introduction, Dr. Butsy. It's always a pleasure to take part in these meetings and particularly to give one of the presentations. So this is going to be rather different. It's a bit of a novel way of engaging the public with astronomy that we stumbled across, and I'll explain how that happened, about 10 years ago now, believe it or not. And I've given it the grand title of Elucidating the Mysteries of the Universe Through Gardening. And you'll see how this pans out as we go along. So here's an overview of the talk. I'm going to give you a little bit of astronomy at the beginning, not too much. Then we come rapidly down to Earth. I'll tell you about the serendipity that led to gardeners meeting astronomers, and talk about two events that were the result of this. Our show garden at the Tatton Flower Show in 2013, and probably even more importantly, the garden we had at the Royal Horticultural Society's annual show at Chelsea in 2015. And then I'll say something about the legacy. So a bit of astronomy. Harold gave his usual very nice talk. He mentioned the Milky Way, which is much more prominent and observable from the clear skies of Botswana than it generally is here in the UK. But you'll see, obviously, you know that it's this Milky Band that on a very clear dark night stretches from horizon to horizon when the moon is not around. You can see it very clearly. And here's an all sky picture. So this is taking the whole of the sky from cameras around the Earth. And this shows this Milky Band punctuated or penetrated by dark bands. And then you can see in the southern part of this, the large and the small Magellanic Clouds sitting down here, which are sort of satellite galaxies of our own galaxy. And as you all know, this is our own galaxy. We sit within the Milky Way, and as we look along the plane in the Milky Way, we see the Milky Way itself. And as we look out of the plane, we don't see such density of stars and gas and dust, which obviously populate the plane. If we were able to step outside our galaxy, look at it from the side, it would look something like this. So you can see this is sometimes likened to two fried eggs put back to back, with the nucleus of the yolks of the eggs sitting in the middle and the white sitting around the side. So if you were able to fly out of our galaxy, something we obviously cannot do, and look down on our galaxy, it would look something like this. So it's a giant spiral, 200,000 million stars or thereabout, a lot of dust and gas as well, spiral arms. And if this were our own galaxy, we sit out somewhere on a spiral arm about 30,000 light years from the center of the galaxy. And the whole thing is about 150,000 light years from one side to the other. Rotating around such that at our position here, it takes something like 220 million years to go around once. So a giant spiral structure. Our own Milky Way probably has a little bit more of a bar in the middle than it's shown in this particular example of a spiral galaxy. But nonetheless, this is pretty much what you would see if you were able to look down on our galaxy, the Milky Way itself. Milky Way is not alone. There are billions, 300 billion, thereabouts, other galaxies in the universe. They form clusters like this. I think this is Hercules cluster, 100 million light years or so away. And clusters form clusters, and we can actually use this view, which is showing how the Hubble Space Telescope did a survey of a very small region of sky just above the bowl of the Big Dipper, a region which is about the size of the full moon. It's about 30 arc minutes across. It stared at it for about 100 and something orbits. We're going back about 20 years now since this was done. And it was a nondescript bit of sky. It was chosen to be very nondescript, nothing special about it. And there was some astonishment to find that it was actually full of galaxies, many of which were recognizable as the sorts of galaxies we see around us now. And yet, this Hubble Deep Field and subsequently Ultra Deep Field were looking at objects as they were between about 2.5 and 10 billion years ago, because that's the time that light has taken to get from those galaxies to ourselves. So we're looking very deep into the universe and seeing, even at those great distances, we're seeing galaxies well formed in the early stages of the universe. The universe itself is about 13.8 billion years old. And we can actually see further than that. We can see back to what's called the surface of last scattering. This is the 3K background, the remnant radiation from the Big Bang. It's as far as we can, at the moment, probe. There are ways postulated of being able to probe even more distantly, but we can see back to that so-called surface of last scattering when the universe was first became transparent to electromagnetic radiation. And this diagram here is a schematic, obviously, of the evolution of the universe from the Big Bang through a period of tremendous size scale increase called inflation, which put parts of the universe out of contact with one another. And then this is after about 375,000 years, which is a blink of an eye in the time scale of the universe. The universe became transparent to radiation. And then after another period of time, a few 100 million years, the first stars began to form. The universe is expanding out fairly steadily. But then in more recent times, there seems to have been an acceleration, which is put down to this nominal stuff called dark energy. Resisting the expansion is the gravitational attraction of everything in the universe, including, as it turns out, predominantly this stuff called dark matter, of which more anon. Anyway, so that's a schematic of the evolution of the universe and a Cook's tour of that in 30 seconds. We'll come back to that afterglow pattern that we're looking at there as we progress in the talk, particularly as we talk about the garden at Chelsea. So let's come down to Earth, to the Canary Isles. Now, the Canary Isles lie off the northwest coast of Africa, a few thousand kilometers southwest of where I'm sitting now. And this island, which is next to the most westerly of the Canaries, La Palma, is where we have, or internationally, there are a lot of big telescopes. In fact, the world's largest optical telescope, called Grantican, is at the top of the mountain on La Palma. And when this image was taken by the European Space Agency, the volcano at the south end of La Palma was active. So you can see that stream of smoke from the gases and so on from the volcano spreading out into the Atlantic. Luckily, that eruption ceased a few months after it started, a year or so ago. It didn't affect the telescopes, which are actually situated in the caldera right at the top here. But one of those telescopes, not the world's largest telescope, but it's the world's largest fully robotic telescope, is the Liverpool telescope. And the Liverpool telescope, I was lucky enough to be the project director of the Liverpool telescope and saw its development from sort of a twinkle in the eye, if you like, to fully functioning and routinely operating, which it has been now for something like nearly 20 years on the top of the mountain, fully autonomously. It has nobody with it routinely during the night. it goes through its pre-programmed sequence of observations, fully robotically, and then the following morning it closes itself up and the data come back to Liverpool to be distributed to astronomers around the world. Now, the next part of the talk is actually this video, which explains a little bit more about where the Liverpool telescope is, top of its mountain. It's a very nice video put together by the Institute of Astrophysics in the Canaries. The sun goes down, the clamshell opens up, doesn't usually open quite as quickly as soon before sunset as that, to be honest, but that's a bit of artistic license. You can see some of the other telescopes that are on top of that mountain. Something like 20 countries have telescopes there. 2,500 meters above sea level. So now it's tracking objects, taking the data, moving on to the next object. Luckily, it's above most of the cloud layer for most of the time. You saw a plane go across. The exciting time I spent was when we were commissioning that telescope, and I sat in that open enclosure, in one corner of the open enclosure with the telescope behind me, with the control panel in front of me. And suddenly it switched over into robotic mode and became like this living creature, working much faster than I could work, observing things, sitting there with the Milky Way overhead and taking all the science data. So it was an amazing privilege to be part of that. As I say, it's been working autonomously and routinely for nearly 20 years now, providing data to the world's astronomical community. But we realized very soon after designing the telescope, never mind commissioning the telescope, that because of the way it operated, we could intersperse the professional observations with requests from schools and the general public. And that's how the National Schools Observatory was formed. You'll remember, those of you who've seen these talks, that Andy Newsom, who's director of the Schools Observatory, gave a talk on the NSO a couple of years ago and went into this in a lot more detail than I'm going to now. But I was at a talk by Andy last Wednesday, and these are the latest numbers on the take-up. There are 20,000 registered users, mainly school students, mainly in the UK and Ireland, but there are others abroad. They've undertaken over 200,000 observations for schools to date. Now, this is not to turn all those school kids into astronomers. It's to teach them some science and math, and mainly to enthuse them about the study of STEM subjects, because it seems that astronomy and space grab the imagination of young people and older people too. And they keep that interest where they might drop the interest in science otherwise. So this is really to enthuse kids about science and technology, engineering and maths in general. 10% of the time on this telescope is for schools. And the school's observatory is their interface. It's free at the point of delivery. The university pays the operations cost of the school's observatory. And it's free to sign up and to take part. But anyway, although this is a fantastic resource, we've been surprised over the years that a lot of schools and general public are not aware of this. And so there's been a push to publicize the existence and the availability of the National Schools Observatory. And what I'm going to tell you about tonight is part of that push. So let's come even more down to earth and talk about the Royal Horticultural Society. It was founded in 1804 by Sir Joseph Banks and John Wedgwood. Now, Joseph Banks, you'll probably know, was the botanist on Captain Cook's expeditions in the 18th century. And I think he became president of the Royal Society, was a contemporary of John Herschel and so on, who's also president of the Royal Society. And the RHS was founded by him and John Wedgwood. In 2022, the RHS had 600,000 members worldwide, mainly in the UK, but worldwide membership. Its primary show is the Chelsea Flower Show, which started in 1913 and in 2022 attracted 168,000 visitors. And then there are 3 regional shows, including the Tatton Park Show, with 102,000 attendees in 2022. Now, you can see my pointer. That is roughly where myself and Steve Barrett are sitting at this very moment in the UK. That is where Chelsea is, suburb of London, alongside the Thames. That's where the Tatton Flower Show is. So only about 20, 30 kilometers, maybe 30 or 40 kilometers from where I'm sitting now is Tatton Park. Tatton Park is very near to Jodrell Bank, for those of you who know Jodrell Bank. The Radio Observatory, which is also the headquarters of the Square Kilometre Array project, of course. This is where the Chelsea Flower Show is held. It's within the grounds of the Royal Hospital in Chelsea, which was set up for ex-service men and women to retire to. Originally, I suppose it was a hospital. Now it's more of a retirement home for ex-military people from the United Kingdom's armed forces and those of the Commonwealth. The flower show itself, it's very difficult to give you an idea of the scale of this, but this is part of the grounds of the Chelsea Hospital taken over by the flower show. It's about this photograph shows about a third of the extent of the show, and this is the main pavilion. Surrounding the main pavilion are avenues of show gardens going down here, across the back, and also sides that you can't see. Then there are more grounds to one side which have other show gardens and so on and so forth. Both these flower shows last a week, roughly. The Chelsea Flower Show is in May, and the Tatton Flower Show is in July. And at these flower shows, the gardens are judged very, very rigorously, and the medals are awarded if medals are given: bronze, silver, silver gilt, and gold. Obviously, gold is the one that people strive for. And then there are 3 categories of garden. And at RHS Chelsea in 2015, there were these particular categories of garden. And so the top prizes are gold medal winners who actually win one of these categories. To give you an idea of the scale of this, the show gardens at RHS Chelsea cost between 500,000 and £1 million each. They only last for a week, but such is the investment. The artisan gardens and the fresh gardens cost rather less because they're smaller, but that's the sort of scale we're talking about. Well, let's introduce the garden team. Howard Miller is a designer, landscape architect. His brother Hugh was my son Matthew's best friend at school and is still his best friend today, even though they're in their late 30s. Dorrie Miller is Howard's mother. Dorrie was a school teacher, is the daughter of a plants person, somebody who had a market garden, and is very interested in plants and always has been. Their friend David Binks, who also lives locally within about, all these people live within about 10 miles where I'm sitting now, runs a construction company for landscape construction. The next three people here, Alison Keane, me, Andy Newsom, members of the society will know Andy, not just from his NSO talk, but also gave the talk last month, I think it was, on astronomy and art. All three of us from John Moores University, working with the National Schools Observatory, among other things. And it was through the association with Dorrie and Howard Miller, because of my son's friendship with Howard's brother, that I got involved, and we all got involved in astronomy and gardens. But there are many other people I'll mention as we go along for their should be mentioned for their generous help and support. And if I forget to mention somebody, then my apologies, but a lot of people were involved in supporting us in what we did. So a bit of history. RHS Tatton has been going for many years, not as long as Chelsea, but has been going a few decades. And in 2010, Dorrie, who is an amateur singer and is involved in a choir in the city of Chester called the Handbags of Harmony. And they got through a BBC competition called Last Choir Standing to the quarterfinals. I think it was on BBC television in 2009. And that was a tremendous thing for an amateur choir to do. And they said, so, what do we do now? Dorrie had been to the Chelsea Flower Show, interested in flowers and plants, and said, why don't we do a garden at the Tatton Flower Show? So they got together, and with Howard doing the design, they produced this garden called the Harmony Garden, Handbags of Harmony Garden, and it won a silver medal, which is pretty good going for amateurs, first time. And we went to see this garden. It was really very, very good and, enjoyable to see. And talking to Dorrie afterwards, she said, I'm never doing that again. It was far too much work, enjoyable, but far too much work. Anyway, the following year, Oxfam, the international charity, approached her to do a garden, which is this garden to the top right, and this is called Rising Waters. It's about illustrating the plight of those people who live in parts of the world where global warming is causing sea levels to rise and making growing of crops and so on more difficult. She enlisted the help of other friends and colleagues to grow plants, and some of my potato plants are actually in this garden here, along with a lot of other plants that other people grew and some that were from local nurseries. Anyway, that garden won a gold medal. And Dorrie said, "Work, I'll never do that again." The following year, the Quakers, the Christian society of which Dorrie and her husband Tom are part, asked them whether they would do a really challenging garden called the Torture Garden. So this was highlighting the plight of political prisoners and so on around the world. And it involved them dumping tons of rubble and weeds in part of the garden that you walked through, and there were commentaries from people who had been held in custody and so on and tortured as you went through that. So quite an emotional experience, and then to emerge into a beautiful garden, which was the analogy of freedom at the end of that. You can imagine when they were setting this up, and it takes 2 weeks to set the thing up, they're setting it up, and the other gardens next to them were setting out all their plants very nicely and neatly and so on. And then suddenly a lorry comes along and tips tons of rubble next to them. Anyway, this very challenging garden won another gold medal of the Royal Horticultural Society. Talked to Dorrie, and she said, definitely never doing this again. Far too much work, far too much risk, expense, and so on, but enjoyable at the time, but we're not doing it again. However, December of 2012, I got a phone call from Dorrie Miller saying, "Mike, you know, I said I would never do this again. Well, one of the themes of the Tatton Flower Show next year for the show gardens is the galaxy. What do you think?" So I said, well, yeah, if we can enlist the help of people like Andy Newsom and the team at the NSO, and we can think of an idea through Howard as to how we're going to do this, and particularly if we can think of an event in 2013 or a forthcoming event that we can hang our hat on to say this is sort of celebrating that, then why not? So here's a view of what would be our galaxy that we've seen before if we could actually see it in this way. And right down in the center of our galaxy here, right in the nucleus, as we've heard in a couple of recent talks, is a supermassive black hole containing about 4 million times the mass of the sun. And everything is sort of rotating around that. Now, it turns out that the prediction, and this is an animation from the space agency, that a gas cloud, a cloud of dust and gas actually, with about the mass of the Earth, which was detected a few years before 2013, and who's being followed, would have a very close encounter in about 3,000 times the radius of the event horizon of the massive black hole in the middle when it got closest to it. So a very close encounter with that black hole, and be torn apart as it's passed the black hole into all sorts of cosmic fireworks. And the predicted closest encounter was March 2014. So this seemed to be a perfect event to as the theme of our garden. This close encounter of this gas cloud, gas and dust, with the central supermassive black hole of our galaxy, which was predicted to produce cosmic fireworks the following March. So this is the garden designed by Howard Miller, erected mainly by Landstruction and designed in collaboration with ourselves at JMU. And it has sort of, you can't really see it from here, you could from the top, or if you walked around, it has a spiral structure like the spiral arms of our galaxy. There are plants representing the different stellar populations of the galaxy in different colors. The black soil you can see there, the sand actually, is from the Canary Isles, from the black sand beaches there. And then right in the middle of the spiral is a sculpture representing the supermassive black hole. It's actually a water feature. So water comes out of the top, spirals down, disappears into the black hole. And then approaching the black hole over here are these plants representing that gas and dust cloud approaching this supermassive black hole. And these, I can remember the name of these are Tylensias, or air plants. And we positioned a telescope in another part of the showground, which seemed to be totally dissociated from this. But if you went over there and you looked through it, you were actually imaging the Tylensia over the top of the supermassive black hole. Unlike the other show gardens, you could actually go into our garden. We wanted people to come in, and there's Andy standing rather by the supermassive black hole in the center of the garden. And we clickered in the number of people going through the garden, and there were 10,000 people that went through the garden that week and that we spoke to. Every few minutes, one of us would do a spiel about what the garden was all about. We'd give out our leaflets and information on the National Schools Observatory, talk about the science behind it, and actually have a thoroughly good time. Very, very different sort of experience. And at the end of the day, we got a gold medal, which you can see here. And we also won the most creative galaxy garden at that flower show. Now, at the end of the flower show, so that was fantastic. But at the end of the flower show, what happens at 4 o'clock, a bell rings, and you can then buy the plant on the that people are selling if they're going to sell them, and then everything is dismantled. And in this case, the plants that are not either taken home or sold, and all the structure, apart from some parts of it, just went into skips and was thrown away. And at that point, after a beautiful week of weather, the rain came down for the first time. And we sat in this tent with the rain coming down and the garden being taken to bits and a lot of it being thrown away, and said, well, you know, feeling slightly miserable, but elated from having won the gold medal. So a real mixture of emotions. But what do we do next? Shall we do something next? And I said, well, yeah, what about Chelsea? The great groans. Well, what should we do? What about dark matter? I said, not having a clue as to how we were going to illustrate that. Anyhow, 2 years later, of course, we ended up at Chelsea, and I'll just tell you a little bit of the background to that. Anyway, dark matter. Well, the matter that we see in the universe is only perhaps 15% of the gravitating mass of matter in the universe. The rest of it is this stuff called dark matter. And exactly what dark matter is, we do not completely understand. We don't know. There are various experiments going on to try and determine this. But we know it exists, and we've known about its existence for decades. From the anomalous way that stars rotate around galaxies, suggesting there is an awful lot more matter in galaxies further out in galaxies particularly than we see in stars and gas and dust. From the way that light is bent, as we'll see later on, by gravitational lensing in clusters of galaxies and by the motion of galaxies themselves in clusters of galaxies. We know there's an awful lot of this stuff called dark matter out there. And 2015, which is the year that we were aiming for to have the garden at Chelsea, knowing that we would need a long running time to raise the funds, to prepare the designs, to get through the competition that there is to get into Chelsea, fierce competition, to get accepted. That year was also the 100th anniversary of the publication of the general theory of relativity by Albert Einstein. And the general theory of relativity predicted that, as well as the effects that you can see from gravitational attraction between bodies, gravity will actually bend light. It's actually warping space-time, but and the first demonstration, or at least the first proof, rather, that the predictions of Einstein were correct, is when Arthur Eddington went to observe an eclipse, total eclipse of the sun, where to one side of the sun you could still see a star, which actually should not have been there, because it was supposed to have been eclipsed by the sun, but the light was bent around the sun by the sun's gravity, so that you saw the star in a slightly different direction from where it actually was. And this verified the predictions of Einstein. Anyway, this gravitational bending of light is a well-known phenomenon now, and is a way of measuring the mass content of things in the universe. If you can actually look at that gravitational distortion of images that comes about by this effect. This is very evident when you look at the James Webb Space Telescope images, which actually probe even further back in that Hubble deep field or ultra deep field I was talking about earlier on, seeing galaxies at even further look back times than with the Hubble. This is a cluster of galaxies, and you can see in among this are these arcs, and these are the distorted images of even more distant galaxies. They're being bent and distorted by the gravitational fields of the galaxies in this cluster of galaxies. And you can see, if you unbend this, you can start to see that these are galaxies. And we can use this gravitational bending to determine the mass that's doing the bending, if you like, this gravitational lensing effect. So there is a way of using this gravitational lensing effect to measure the intervening mass and to measure the preponderance of dark matter. But what Howard did, he's an architect, he's not a scientist, but what Howard did was he found this conceptualization of the path from this surface of last scattering. So this is the 3K background with bright spots on it, which are primordial condensations, if you like, which will lead to the formation ultimately of galaxies and clusters of galaxies as time goes on. So these are hotspots on the cosmic microwave background. And this diagram has time in space in this direction here. So we're looking back in time to the earliest times where we can actually observe structure in the universe, which is back to this surface of last scattering. And these are paths of rays of light through the universe being bent by things like clusters of galaxies as they traverse that space, and ending up at the present day with a view of the universe that is distorted by that passage through through the matter of the universe. And this satellite here, the Planck satellite, which flew between 2009 and 2013, was doing a microwave survey, scanning the whole sky at microwave, looking at the structure of the microwave background. And by looking at in detail at that structure and how it's and comparing it with very detailed models, the distortion that's put into that structure, if you like, by the amount of material that there is causing this gravitational lensing effect, all that can be sort of deconvolved to give you an idea, a very good idea, of the total mass content of the universe, the amount of material there is in dark matter. It also probes dark energy as well. And it showed that the majority of the mass of the universe is indeed in dark matter compared to the normal matter we see around us. But in terms of energy density, it's actually the dark energy that makes up most of the energy density of the universe. Dark matter is next, and normal matter is only about 5% or so of the whole. Anyhow, so we have that schematic from the very distant universe to the present day, light being bent by encounters with matter. And this is the concept for the garden. So this is the surface of last scattering. These are rays of light coming through from the very distant past to the present day. And this is a so-called oculus or viewing contraption at this end, which is the present day. And in between the two are large plantings rather, such as this one here, which would have bamboos in it, with a lot of bending of light going on around here, because this represents a cluster of galaxies. There are black holes and different colored plants here to represent the different types of stars and galaxies that you see in the universe. The whole thing has a background of grasses which wave in the wind to sort of illustrate the fact that you can see the effect of a force that otherwise you can't. You can see that effect, but you can't see the force itself. And this is the analogy that's used of the wind on grasses. Anyway, by serendipity or design, it turns out that this shape, this long, thin shape, is the least favored shape of a garden for designers to propose for the Chelsea Flower Show, and therefore is most likely to be accepted. It's more likely to be accepted entry because it's something that's not put forward as much. Then we had to build the thing. So the rays of light are modeled in these thin tubes, and this is a company that normally makes garden furniture. So Howard's 3D CAD design was turned into these three-dimensional tubes. The oculus and the light box at the other end, manufactured by a local engineering company, which is about 5 miles away from here in Ellesmere Port. And then the whole thing had to be transported down to the Chelsea Flower Show and reassembled. Part of this entailed taking you couldn't transport these tubes as they were. They had to be taken to pieces and labeled, and then the whole thing re-erected back on site down in Chelsea. So here are people beavering away, re-erecting the garden down in Chelsea, or erecting it for the first time, actually, because it had never been put together anywhere else. All the bits were coming from all over the place, including the plants from several different gardens, garden centres and so on, nurseries around the country. Here, a crane is craning in the giant bamboo, representing a cluster of galaxies. This is Dorrie's husband, Tom, arriving with an emergency set of seeds to go around the edge of the garden when we realized that what we were using up to that point wasn't going to work. And so we had to sow these seeds and get them to grow in a week. This is myself and Howard Miller sitting now mixing paint, because all these tubes, as I say, were, I think it's 100 and something different lengths and different shapes, all labeled up to fit together. And when you took the labels off, they left marks. They left blank parts because it had been left to naturally go to corrode a little bit. And we found that we had to use our fingernails to take off and soap and so on, to take off the labels, and then they left marks. So Howard had to go to an art shop, and here we are mixing up a rust color to cover up the marks, because the judges are absolutely fastidious and pernickety about this, how the garden looks. We also found that some of the plants, and many of these plants were actually from Dorrie Miller's back garden in her house just down the road from where I'm sitting now. Some of the plants from one of the nurseries were actually diseased. Now, sitting around us, where we were using plants from someone's back garden, to some extent, and plants that we brought in and bought from nurseries, the other gardens around us, which were actually flying people in by helicopters with business managers in suits, and some of them had 10 times as many plants as they actually needed because they were just picking the very best. We couldn't spare any plants, so we actually had to ask other gardens there whether we could borrow some of their spare plants to fill in the ones that we found that were diseased. Anyway, by the end of the Sunday, it was all finished and ready to go. We'd got our leaflets designed, and we had like 10,000 of these printed, ready to go. And the garden was then complete for the Monday, which was the press day, which was what it says on the tin, the private view, which is when the Queen came round, and I had to go. Only Howard had the badge that allowed him to stay. And then the evening gala, which is full of celebrities and people who want to be seen more than people very often that really want to look at gardens. But Howard had been there from the early morning until about 8 o'clock at night. And I said to him, look, I'll just take care of it now. You go. And the crowd's beginning to thin out. And off he went, and I'm left there on my own. And a few people came along. A chap and two ladies came by, and they asked me about the garden and what it was all about, and why astronomy was important. And I talked about various things, and I gave the old tale about, yes, if we can understand what's going on in the core of the sun, for example, we can harness nuclear fusion, and that will solve all our energy needs forever. And one of the women turned to the man and she said, isn't that what your advisors used to tell you? And I realized afterwards that this was a government minister that I'd failed to recognize. And anyway, I don't know whether he was convinced or not. And then another chap right at the end of the evening, arrived with his wife and presume his daughter, and he was very, very interested in the steelwork, and he was asking all about the steelwork, and then he said, "And how much would you want to put this in my garden?" And he said, "I'll give you £30,000. Speak to my people." And then he asked me what my phone number was. Phone my phone and said, "You've now got my phone number. Phone me." Anyway, cut a very long story short. When I got home, I realized that this was a steel magnate, one of the UK's richest men who happens to live nearby. And I'll tell you the story of what happened to the garden right at the end in a few minutes' time. So this was the garden ready to go. BBC had been there, and during Chelsea Week, those of you in the UK will know that the BBC runs an hour-long programme every night at prime time, showing the Chelsea Flower Show, and our garden was on every night on BBC television. This is Andy Newsom with Maggie Adrin-Pocock, who was our celebrity. She's the presenter of BBC's Sky at Night TV programme, is well known in the UK for popularising science, and a great character, actually, lovely person. She was good enough to come along and help us on press day. A very bubbly personality, and it was great to have her. Then the following morning, before the public arrived or let in, the RHS members anyway, on the very first day, the judges had been round the previous day, and now was the moment of truth. So the BBC TV crews are gathering. The head judge and the BBC presenter come, and Howard is there opening the envelope. And we won gold. So great elation, absolute elation. And there we are, as Andy Newsom, myself, Howard, Dorrie Miller, and Dave from Landstruction. And if you look closely at Dorrie, she's holding her shoulder in a slightly awkward way. What happened was, as the judges came round and Howard opened the envelope, Dorrie ran over, tripped up, fell over, and broke her collarbone. So I ended up going with Dorrie in the ambulance to Chelsea Hospital. And as we go along, Howard is on the phone, and he said, he obviously wanted to know how his mother was. But then he said, we've just won the best in class. We've just won the fresh garden category. And you remember from the beginning, there are only 3 classes of garden, and we'd won one of them. Amateurs at the world's top flower show with our dark matter garden had just won the top in class and the gold medal. And Dorrie was on gas and air, took the mask from her face and said, "Fantastic," and put the mask back on again. Anyway, so it went on. We got loads of coverage. We got, this is the Chancellor of the university. And we had the UK's chief scientist come by. This is our local MP, Andrew Miller, sadly passed away a couple of years ago now, but Andrew and I did a parliamentary scientist pairing scheme, so I got to know him very well over several years. A great supporter of ours and all things to do with science. He was chair of the Commons Science Select Committee at this point. And that's his wife, Fran. We had the Chelsea pensioners come by, of course. We had the ambulance crew. We took the medics who helped to take Dorrie to the hospital. They came by. But overall, our aim was to increase public awareness. There are 165,000 visitors, 70% female, which is unusual for something in a, getting across science is to have an audience that's largely female. Is a great thing. 1,100 press are present. They do an audit of the TV coverage, and it reached that year 211 million people worldwide, because it wasn't just broadcast in the UK, it was rebroadcast abroad as well. We were in every major newspaper in the UK and many foreign papers as well. We gave out 8,000 leaflets. We spoke to 14,000 people directly. And after 20 pages of Google at the time, we were still appearing. It's still there. It doesn't cover 20 pages, but it's still there if you Google Dark Matter Garden, Chelsea. So, but at the end of the day, again, the show ends, people buy plants, everything is dismantled, and a lot of these things are just thrown in a skip. And we didn't want that to happen, nor did we want it to end up in an individual's back garden. It had actually cost us £100,000 with support from the university, from the Science and Technology Facilities Council, and one or two sponsors. So we wanted it to end up somewhere more permanently. The top right slide there is of a TV personality called Monty Don, talking to Howard, and they appeared on a subsequent BBC TV series called Small Spaces. So we wanted this not to be dismantled and thrown away, put in a skip, but we wanted it to be somewhere that could be seen in many years to come. And that happened to be STFC's, the Research Council's, Daresbury Labs, who we were already in negotiations with when the show was ongoing, but the final agreement was only reached at the end of that week. So it was shipped to Daresbury. It was dismantled at Chelsea, shipped to Daresbury and reassembled. And then it was reopened, and it's still at Daresbury Labs, which is not far from where I'm sitting now, by the local MP. The then chair of the Research Council is to his right. Dorrie with her sling is there. Howard, the head of Daresbury Labs, next to him. And it's still there now outside the visitor centre. And it made the front cover of the STFC's impact report for that year. And if you'll just indulge me for a couple of minutes, I'll show you this video, which time lapse of the of the garden at Daresbury Labs over several days, and you get an idea of how the garden was constructed at Chelsea. Just leave this running for a couple of minutes. You'll see also how the weather changes. And eventually that poster, which is outside the visitor centre at Daresbury Labs, changes to reflect what is there. You can imagine what a complex task this was to do it in Chelsea when you've got all those other gardens being constructed around you, and access to it was limited. I have to admit, although it was incredibly hard work, the 2 weeks I spent down at Chelsea in the preparation and also the show itself was some of the best times I've had professionally. It was really superb to be working with a team of people, to be interacting with the public the way we did, and it's just marvelous. I was talking to a woman in the main pavilion who'd been there many years, and she'd won a gold medal playing. It was one of the plants from in Edinburgh, funnily enough. Her husband was a professor of chemistry at the University of Edinburgh, and he said, yes, it's a marvelous experience. Where else can you go where people tell you you're brilliant all week? Certainly not academia. There we go. So, sorry I've overrun by a few minutes, but thanks for listening. Remember, don't ask me anything about the plant.
Thank you very much, Mike. Yeah, very fascinating. So I think I would welcome comments.
Chairman.
I have a question for Mike. Are you now working on a dark energy garden?
Well, actually, I did suggest that. Howard was actually then approached by a big children's hospital, Alder Children's Hospital. And last year they did one of the gardens in aid of Alder, and we went down to see that. Getting the whole thing together, though, was just so demanding and a bit risky as well, because I said we managed to get together £100,000 to, and that was the minimum really to do it. And I wonder whether Howard would do another garden at Chelsea, because it is such a lot of work, and it's a bit of a side. It's very good to have on his CV, and you know he's capitalised from it. In fact, he was invited by the RHS to submit another garden, and it turned out to be this one from Alder, which did well. You know, they got a silver gilt this time, but personally, I would love to do it again. I have to say, I would love to do it again. It was fantastic. I mean, we had to rent an apartment in Kensington, which cost in itself a few £1,000s, because we had to have 2 apartments, in fact, for 2 weeks, because we had 10 people down there. But yeah, we were going to the show on Boris bikes. We were looking for Brillo pads to try and scour the tubes to get those labels off. And you can't buy things like that in Kensington and Chelsea because nobody does their own dishes, basically. So no, it was great. But yeah, I'd love to do it again, but yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think there's a question by David.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mike. Talking of gardens, I mean, I imagine that the upkeep of that garden must require a specialist.
Well, we wanted somewhere where they would have gardeners who were employed, and it doesn't actually require much more than pruning and watering. And they do have their own gardeners at Daresbury Labs. So we wanted somewhere where it would be maintained into the future and looked after and mean something to where it went. So this was ideal, to be honest. It seems such a shame to get rid of the Galaxy Garden, because the Galaxy Garden was, if anything, slightly bigger and was absolutely beautiful. But that would have taken more maintenance, and we didn't have somewhere at that stage for it to go. Dorrie's Gardens, the torture garden, actually at the Quakers' main meeting house in Birmingham, in their garden. So that has been moved there. But most of these gardens just don't go anywhere afterwards. They're taken to pieces. The plants are sold off. I had the black hole, by the way. I kept the black hole, and it was by the side of my greenhouse here. You'll be relieved that I never turned it on. So, but I had the black hole for many years, and then it gradually disintegrated. I'll just tell you one joke that one of the people who came past, one of the visitors, when we had the garden at Tatton, one of the visitors said, so if we disappeared down this black hole, would we emerge in another flower show at the other side of the universe? Anyway.
I think there's another hand up by Richard.
Yeah. Yep. Hi, Richard.
Hi there. That was an absolutely fascinating talk. Being interested in both gardening and astronomy was really good.
Thank you.
I want to ask you something about the Liverpool telescope. You said it's robotic, but is it pre-programmed robotic, or is it controllable from anywhere in the world in real time?
Well, it could be controllable, but it's actually it's autonomous in that it has a list of targets. So these are chosen from proposals, the scientific ones, that are put forward by professional astronomers around the world, go through peer review, and the successful applicants, their programs, their targets are loaded into the scheduler, and then the telescope chooses which target will be the next one to be observed. And there are various criteria for that, where it is in the sky, compared to the time of the day, the importance of the object or the program itself, and so on and so forth. So it goes through this program completely autonomously. So the astronomers sleep, and then the next morning the data come back. You can actually intercept the data as they're being taken as well. And it is possible to control remotely, but that is not the way that it's normally operated. So
I see.
It's autonomous, yeah.
Could I ask you a second question about dark matter?
Sure.
As a thought experiment, dark matter is said to not interact with ordinary matter at all, except gravitationally. If you were, as a thought experiment, to place two planets, say the size of the Earth, in say 100 million kilometers apart, with no other gravitational attraction nearby, and you let go of them, would they rush towards each other? One was dark matter and one was ordinary matter. Would they rush towards each other under gravitational attraction and pass through each other, and then oscillate back and forth?
Well, it depends what that dark matter is, I guess. Yeah, if it's weakly interacting massive particles, I guess that might well be the case. Yeah.
I see. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, interesting.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't see any more hands up. I think, we should give a round of applause for that fascinating talk.
Thank you.
Well done, Mike. Excellent
Thanks a lot.
presentation.
Thank you.
I think we'll take up gardening, quite a few of us, so we'll come for advice. But thank you very much for the fascinating talk. I think that's that will be the end of the session.
I haven't got any questions for Mike, but if you will, I'd like to just follow up on something that Harold said earlier. Harold was talking about the nebulae that could be seen in the Botswana skies. Some of those we can see from the UK, but unfortunately, the brightest one, Eta Carina, is one that we can't see from the UK. But by coincidence, I was actually having a look at an image that I'd taken some 10 years ago when I was on safari in Kenya. Would you allow me to share so I can show you the picture?
Yep. Can I can make you co-host?
Yeah, no, that's fine. It's now.
Oh, you can do it.
There we go. So that's the picture of the Eta Carina Nebula that I took from Africa 10 years ago. And unfortunately, that is the brightest nebula, one of the brightest nebula in the sky, but unfortunately, we cannot see it from the UK. And this was taken with a camera on a little homemade star tracker. So remember that you are very lucky to have this nebula in your skies because we cannot see it from the UK. And it's just a coincidence that I happened to be looking at this just a couple of days ago. And I was very interested when Harold started describing these things in your skies. So I just thought I'd share that with you.
Thank you very much, Steve. That's a very interesting comment that you've made. And I've learned a lot from that. Thank you. I thought you had to do Hubble. So you did it in your back garden.
Can I just mention one thing I forgot to say, which was when we were there in 2015 and for several years either side, Thailand, the Thailand Tourism Office had a big display in the main pavilion promoting tourism in Thailand. And as a sort of pipe dream, I had this vision of Botswana having a stand at Chelsea advertising the joys and attractions of tourism in Botswana. Considering the TV audience, the press audience, and so on and so forth, I thought it would be fantastic, but it is a bit of a, as I say, a pipe dream, but there we go. Anyway, I forgot to say that. Thanks for indulging me.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, I wonder whether there are any more comments, but I think we'll call it a night. Thank you, Harold and Mike.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Mike and Harold.